My father said I was quiet the way still water is quiet. Not empty, just deep. He meant it kindly. I know he did. But the settlement handlers at Vorith Station didn't mean it kindly when they said it. When they said it, they meant I was nobody. We had come out to the colony on a supply transfer. Dad was a structural assessor. Not military, not frontier trained. Just a man who could look at a wall and tell you whether it would stand through a storm season. The colony needed that. The colony needed a lot of things. What it did not need, according to Handler Drevok, an undersized 13-year-old boy trailing around the equipment pens and getting in the way. I heard him say that to my father on our second morning. He said it loudly enough to make sure I heard it too. Vorith Station sat on the edge of a grassland that had no name yet, just a biome designation on the survey charts. Frontier posts out here didn't name their geography until they'd survived it for a full season cycle. They weren't being poetic. They were being practical. You don't name a river until you're sure you'll still be there when it floods. Station kept a War-Hound pack for perimeter work. 6 animals bred out of a canine line that had been gene-pushed for 3 generations on the outer colonies. Large, rangy, bioluminescent striping along the flanks and jawline that pulsed faintly silver blue in low light. They were not pets. The handlers made that clear to every new arrival. The War-Hounds were working animals, trained at cost, valued above most equipment. You did not approach their pen. You did not make eye contact. You certainly did not attempt to feed, touch, communicate with them outside of a sanctioned handling session. I wasn't trying to break any of those rules on the third morning. I was just cutting across the near yard on the way to the water reclamation unit, where my father had set me a task counting joint fittings. Pen was 30 meters off my path. I wasn't going near it. I wasn't thinking about it. The sound stopped me. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. A sustained, resonant tone, almost like a chord, coming from 6 throats at once. I turned without planning to. All 6 War-Hounds were at the fence line, pressed close to it, heads low, striping lit bright and steady. Every one of them was looking directly at me. I stood there. I didn't run. I didn't know why I didn't run. The sensible thing would have been to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't noticed. But something in the way they were looking at me felt less like threat and more like recognition. Like they had been waiting for something to come through that yard, and I had finally come through. I walked to the fence. I know that was not the right choice. But I walked to it and I put my hand on the wire, and the nearest one, the largest, the alpha female, gray-flanked with a jawline that could shear through hull plating, pressed her forehead against the wire on the other side of my hand and held it. There, the low cord went quiet. All 6 of them sat down. I stood there for what felt like a long time before I heard boots behind me. Handler Drevok was not a man who raised his voice to make a point. He was a man who lowered it, which was worse. He told me, very quietly, to step back from the fence. He told me I had come within a bad decision of serious injury. He told me the pack was keyed to his command signal, and anyone outside that signal framework was, to the hounds, either neutral or prey. Stepped back. I didn't argue. I said yes, sir, and I went to count the joint fittings. I noticed he was still standing at the pen fence for a long time after I left, and the War-Hounds, I noticed, had gone back to the far end of the pen. All except the alpha female, who was still sitting at the wire, watching the direction I had gone. That evening she was outside the bunkhouse door. Not in her pen. Outside our bunkhouse door. Drevok couldn't explain it. The pen lock showed no fault. The fence showed no breach. The alpha female sat on the bunkhouse step like she had always lived there and regarded the 3 handlers, who came to retrieve her with the particular expression of a creature that has made a decision and considers the matter closed. She went back to the pen when Drevok called her. She went calmly, without resistance. She looked back at the bunkhouse door once before he led her away. My father thought it was funny. I told him not to say that to Drevok. It happened again the next morning, and the morning after that. On the 4th morning, all 6 of them were at the bunkhouse step. By then the story had gotten around the station. The frontier settlements are small. Stories travel. A few of the colonists found it interesting. A few found it concerning. Drevok found it something beyond concerning. I could see it in the way he looked at me across the yard, measuring. He was a man who understood his animals, and his animals were doing something he did not understand, and the variable was a quiet 13-year-old boy who had no business being on the frontier at all. He called a station meeting. It was framed around pack behavioral protocols. Whether the War-Hounds needed retraining, whether their conditioning had degraded. But I understood what the meeting was actually about. My father understood too. We sat at the back and didn't speak. Drevak laid it out plainly. The pack was responding anomalously to an untrained individual. That was a liability. If the pack's command hierarchy was fractured, the station's perimeter security was compromised. He used the word liability 3 times. He never used my name. He just said the individual. He made the words sound like something that needed to be corrected. He proposed that I be restricted from the outer yards entirely for the remainder, our stay. He proposed this politely, and the settlement administrator nodded along, and I sat at the back of the room and felt something go very still inside me. Not angry, just still. After the meeting, I went out to the eastern water point to check a drainage outlet my father had flagged on his survey. It was a 40-minute walk across the near grassland, past the back edge of the perimeter. I was halfway there when I heard the pack. They were running the perimeter fence line, all 6 of them. The bioluminescent, striping blazing full silver blue in the afternoon light. When they saw me, they shifted direction without stopping and ran straight to the fence at the nearest point, crashing to a halt and pressing their heads through the wire. The alpha female was in front. She was looking at me. Not at the fence. Not at the grassland behind me. At me. The same way she had looked through the bunkhouse door. Like she was saying something she expected me to understand. I crouched down. I put my hand on her jaw through the wire. The way you would with any animal that knows you. Gently, without hesitation, without fear. She closed her eyes. The low chord started again in all 6 throats. I don't know how long Drevak had been standing behind me. When I stood up and turned around, he was 10 meters back, and the expression on his face was not the controlled, measuring look from the meeting. It was something older, something that a man carries when he has spent 30 years understanding a thing, and has just seen the thing do something his 30 years can't count for. He looked at the pack. He looked at me. The pack was still sitting, all 6 of them pressed to the wire, all 6 striping lit at full steady brightness. He didn't apologize. He was not the kind of man who apologized quickly, but he stood there for a long moment, and then he said, quietly, more to himself than to me, that in 31 years of pack work he had only ever seen the hounds do what they were doing twice before. Both times it had been veteran handlers, with more than a decade of frontier experience. Both times the pack had designated them by the old colonial term the original breeders had used for the behavior. He said the term, still flame walking. He said it meant the hounds had identified something in a person that their instinct classified as apex, not trained, performed, just present. Something that burned without making noise. Something the pack didn't need explained to them. He was quiet for another moment. Then he told me that the restriction from the outer yards was lifted, and he walked back toward the station, and he didn't look back. My father was at the water point when I arrived. He had heard none of it. I told him the drainage outlet looked clear. He nodded and made a note on his survey board. Behind us, across the grassland, I could hear the pack settling. 6 voices going quiet one by one, like lanterns being turned down. Not dark, just resting. I didn't say anything else to my father about it. Some things you don't need to explain. You just carry them, still and quiet, and they stay lit.